All right, U.S. history, folks. This is the first DLD of possibly many DLDs throughout this 9 weeks. So I'm going to get right into notes today. We're still going over World War II. We're actually getting to D-Day today, Americans' invasion of Europe, Normandy, even some island hopping in the Japanese campaign. But two things real quick. Number one, your assignment, all right? It's going to be at the very end of this module. Should be pretty quick and easy. It's just a quick Canvas quiz, 5 questions, and everything you need to know to answer those questions is going to be covered right here in this video. And then number two, try to hop on that Canvas conference later on today. It's going to be live. It's going to be interactive. Just want to see how it works, right? Is it something that we can use a little bit later on throughout this 9 weeks to just get together if we're going to have to continue this virtual or distance learning here. So let me shrink my big old face down here and we can get to some notes. So here we go. All right, so World War II. Let's talk about how the home front was looking. First off, women were huge in World War II. When all the men, and there was a huge influx of men basically enlisting after Pearl Harbor. I mean, it just like put a national fervor into place. Everybody wanted to be involved in the war in some way, shape, or form. That means most of the men immediately enlisted to go fight, and that left women at home to pick up what was happening domestically, like in the United States. So there became this famous poster, Rosie the Riviter. Everybody kind of knows her, and it was basically just women getting it done on the home front. So that is one part of what was going on. A couple different Rosie the Riviter posters right there. The Great Migration resumed, and it actually caused some tough things, right? So the Great Migration was basically people within the United States moving from like countryside or rural living to more in the cities. And in those cities, right, you had a lot of ethnic diversity, a lot of people moving there, at the same time, and a lot of different nationalities, a lot of diversity, like I said, and it caused some problems sometimes. So the Zoot Suit Riots was just one example. Those were Mexican Americans that maybe hadn't mastered the English language, maybe still kind of lived within, their Hispanic culture. And in Los Angeles, there was actually a group of Navy men who came in and started a riot and actually caused a lot of injuries and some deaths, and it was called the Zoot Suit Riots. And guess who was punished for most of that? Even though the Navy soldiers were the ones who kind of started it, it was mostly the Mexican Americans that were dressed in these zoot suits, really long jacket and baggy pants like you see in the picture there, that were arrested. So just goes to show you like there was still a lot of things going on in the United States that weren't the best, even though we had this war going on overseas. Wage and price controls, you could probably ask some of your grandparents, maybe great-grandparents about this. Maybe even your parents heard stories from their parents about this, but everything was rationed because people were panicking, right? Not much different than the coronavirus stuff that's going on right now. I mean, people are panicking. They're worried about food being available in grocery stores. You can buy the toilet paper by the pound. So what we did in the United States during World War II was we rationed certain items, right? We rationed gasoline, we rationed foods. So you would actually be given these rationing chips in some cases. And you can see some of those authentic World War II rationing chips there in the presentation. And these are just 2 examples. Blue points were used for processed foods, so you could not buy as many processed foods as you want. You had to have the rationing chips along with the money to buy those things. And then the red points were for some fats or oils or meats, because all this stuff was being rationed so that people wouldn't freak out when grocery stores were sold out of it. So also people kicked in by doing victory gardens. I mean, they planted any free soil anywhere around, especially in these big cities. It might be your backyard, which was small to begin with, but you would plant up a victory garden and use what you grew to kind of supplement anything that you could buy as far as what you wanted to eat. And then another way that we kicked in was war bonds. The most popular one was called an E-bond, and it was sold for $18.75. And 10 years later, you could redeem it for $25, which, kind of seems crazy that 10 years later, that's all the money that you're gaining. But people, like I said, were infused with patriotism. The attack on Pearl Harbor really, like I said, made that grow. So people would go out and buy war bonds. If you remember the movie that we watched, Memphis Belle, that was one of the big things that they were trying to do with the Memphis Belle crew, was try to put them out there as like heroes and rally people to buy war bonds. Just that money, all that would go towards the war effort. So it was just more help. All right, let's get to the good stuff. This is Operation Overlord. All right. This was the plan that we had to invade and take back Germany. So there was a lot of things that went into this, right? Number one, that highlighted area right there in France was France. Entire France was occupied by Germany, right? Well, that little area right there is where they expected us to invade, and you see why. I mean, you see the distance right here between Great Britain. That's Great Britain right there, and this is part of France right here at Pas de Calais, right? Or, if you're from Indiana, you might pronounce that Pas de Calais or whatever. But anyway, we fed that thought. Like, we wanted the Germans to think that's where we're going to attack. So we set up like a whole bunch of fake stuff on this side of the English Channel on Great Britain. Cardboard tanks, fake ships. We even had like fake radio communications going out talking about how we were going to attack in that place, even though we never had any intention. We were going to storm the beaches of Normandy, which are in this area right here. Okay. And we thought that would give us the element of surprise by not letting the Germans know where we were going to attack, and it actually worked because Hitler sent most of his troops, especially his biggest tank divisions, to that Pas de Calais area. So on June 6, 1944, we finally got a clear day where Eisenhower and everybody else, Eisenhower, who's the commander of all Allied forces in Europe at this point, thought that it was time to launch this attack. So June 6, every year we celebrate as kind of D-Day anniversary, but it was June 6, 1944, that we sent 5 divisions into the beaches of Normandy. And you had 5 different landing spots. 2 were United States, American forces. 2 of those divisions were UK or British forces. And then 1 was actually Canada, a Canadian force. And some of the names were Omaha, Utah, Sword, Juneau. And the one that saw probably the heaviest resistance as far as Americans being involved was the beaches of Omaha. And that's where you see a lot of videos about D-Day now. Some of you guys might have seen videos like Saving Private Ryan or other D-Day examples of the fighting. And almost always that's from the beaches of Omaha, because some of these landing spots landed to very little resistance, but there was heavy resistance and lots of deaths at the beaches of Omaha, which was one that the United States forces landed on. So basically, D-Day was unparalleled. Like, we had never done anything like it. You had 100,000 soldiers being shipped in, landing amphibiously. You had 23,000 paratroopers paratrooping in on land to kind of fight from both sides, behind and in front of some of these German forces that were holding these areas. And like I said, you had 5 different landing spots taken up by American, British, and Canadian forces. Some pictures of what this looked like. You've probably seen pictures like this in movies before, right? This is pretty much exactly what you see when you watch the beginning of Saving Private Ryan, is that storming the beaches of Normandy at Omaha. There's General Eisenhower talking to his troops, basically briefing them on Operation Overlord, and then one more little piece of history here is just kind of an incoming message about D-Day taking place. So after D-Day takes place and we land and take some area back from France against the German forces, that's kind of the beginning of the end for Hitler's forces in Europe. So let's kind of turn our attention real quick to the other front of this war, which is the Japanese front. And the United States was really kind of fighting in 2 different places here, right? So, Eisenhower and, his men were fighting in Germany, and then Douglas MacArthur and Chester Nimitz, who's the leader of our Navy, was fighting the Japanese in all of these islands in the South Pacific. So we had some trouble in the South Pacific. We had actually been pushed out of the Philippines. MacArthur had to leave the Philippines because he was taking heavy losses, vowed that he would return there, and he does return there. But we learned a lot of lessons from our failures early in this war on the Pacific front. And we found that the coral reefs were a real problem. Like, our boats couldn't get close enough for our men to land amphibiously. So we came up with these Amphtrack, right, amphibious tractors that had these almost tank-like tracks that would like just roll over the coral reefs and get us right up onto land so we could invade amphibious a little easier. MacArthur does hold good on that return to the Philippines. He actually had to leave in March of 42. He returns in October of 1944. And from there, we just kind of like engage in this island hopping campaign to take all these islands back that were taken over by the Japanese. A couple that were important to us, obviously the Philippines, because that's United States territory. And a couple of you may have heard of, which are Iwo Jima and Okinawa, which were two of the heaviest fighting in the Pacific front of this war. It was not easy because it did seem that the Japanese soldiers would rather die than surrender, and that's why you saw high Japanese casualties and very low Japanese prisoners of war. They would rather die than be caught. And you see that through kamikaze attacks where they would fly their planes directly into ships while taking their own life. They would also take out heavy casualties, maybe even sink a U.S. ship. And that was what was important to them, was sacrificing their own life for the greater good, for Japan, for the country. That was seen as a huge badge of honor. So all said and done, in the Philippines at least, you had 80,000 killed and less than 1,000 surrendered. That's just a little idea there of how hard the fighting was and how they literally fought down to the last man when it came to these Japanese soldiers. So look, hopefully this gives you a little bit of info as far as the middle of World War II here, kind of right after the United States gets involved. I did leave a couple nuggets in this video. There's a couple things that I either left out, right, or a couple things that I showed you, little hidden meaning, little hidden message. If you can figure out either one of those and shoot me a Canvas message as to what you think I may have left out or maybe like put in here secretly, and you correctly identify it, I'll give you 5 extra bonus points on that Canvas quiz that you guys are taking. So Canvas quiz is going to be worth 25 points, and if you get one of those hidden messages, Easter eggs, whatever you want to call them, then I'll give you 5 extra points. You could possibly get a 30 out of 25. So Canvas message me if you think you caught one of those. So look, I'll probably see you again in a couple days, and we'll be talking more about World War II. But for now, I'm out.